I agree that symbiotic and interstitial strategies have this very ambiguous ideological status, because in order for them to work, they have to play off the fact that they solve problems in the existing system and make it work better, which is why they're acceptable. But they do so in a way that expands alternatives, which is why they're threatening. And how that contradiction plays out, I don't think is preordained. I think that's a question of social struggles, confrontations, the ability to win victories, to create certain spaces and defend them when they come under attack. And that's pretty indeterminate. I don't think we know in advance how far we can go on it.
Sorry, Valerie, we've other people who have to let them in very small amounts of time. Helena, then Frank, then we have a question here, and then...
Hi, I'm Helena Sheehan. I'm an academic Marxist, but I've also been an activist for many years in both anarchist, Marxist, and social democratic formations. And I feel over the years that I've evolved some kind of a synthesis within myself of these different traditions of the left. But for many years, I feel that I, like much of the left, has been in the grip of this image, this story coming from the October Revolution. And I feel that, and I've studied it and written about it with some care, and I still defend a lot of it. But, I think that it has made me move away somewhat from a ruptural way of thinking. Because I think that we need to move from capitalism to socialism in a way that thinks more about the compatibility of ends and means. And I think that a radical social transformation of capitalism into socialism will create a more solid base for socialism. However, my problem listening to the way you outlined it, and I agree with you in very broad terms, is that so much of the world has been stolen from us. How do we take that back? I mean, the old Marxist concept about expropriation of the expropriators, I still believe in that. I don't know how we do that anymore. But I don't think that just building alternative cooperatives from below can adequately address the radical redistribution of wealth and taking back this wealth that's been taken from the working people of the world. How would you address that?
I unequivocally agree that on social justice grounds, expropriating the appropriators is completely justified, that the wealth of capital is morally unjust. If I could snap my fingers and have it happen and shut my eyes about unintended consequences, I wouldn't have moral qualms about it. The question is, some things which are just are not achievable. And there may be alternatives that are achievable that get you part of the way towards the real payoff that you want from justice. So the real payoff you want from justice is for people to have access to the social and material conditions to live flourishing lives. So if I could magically create an enclave of non-capitalism that would live in peaceful coexistence with the bastards and let them do their capitalist thing, and it was secure enough and productive enough that people could live good lives in my enclave, and people could freely exit to it. Well, it wouldn't be as good as, I said this is a fantasy, but it wouldn't be as good as getting rid of capitalism, but it would be pretty good with respect to the moral grounds on which we attack capitalism, which is it denies people the capacity to live flourishing lives. That's what's wrong with capitalism. And if you could create alternatives which create space for that, especially given the current technological possibilities, this is another theme which we haven't really explored, but we are in an era of a contradiction of forces and relations of production like nothing we've seen since the early Industrial Revolution. Economies of scale, for example, are collapsing. And that one of the key material foundations for the capacity of capital to monopolize means of production is increasing returns to scale. Because it means that big is better with respect to productivity. In all sorts of areas, that's no longer true. And that makes worker cooperatives way more viable than they used to be, because they can be small and still be highly productive. In Madison, for example, I invoke Madison, Wisconsin because it's where I live, so I know all the cases. There's a high-tech engineering worker cooperative that makes industrial robots. It's very high-tech, cutting-edge engineering robots. It's a worker-owned firm in which the machinists and the engineers and the receptionists are all co-equal members of the co-op. That is, it's one person, one vote. It's not a share owners partnership, it's a worker cooperative. And they outcompete all their rivals. And they're a 100-person firm, and that's because you don't need economies of scale anymore because of information technologies and the like. That is really the future of many sectors in the 21st century. Some people have argued I think it's science fiction-y, but these new 3D printers allow for very small-scale, high-productivity manufacturing of a sort that just hasn't existed in capitalism. Well, all of these, once you get, this is a technical point, but once you get flat returns to scale, then the obstacles to self-organization of production on small scale and network connections between producers just becomes way, way simpler. And when you combine that with the information flow technologies, which make coordination easier, the prospects of a non-capitalist sector effectively surviving and reproducing itself alongside capitalism and becoming the Proudhonian attractive alternative, it's less of a fantasy than it was during the Industrial Revolution.
Can I ask Darragh, what's our absolute cut-off time? Is it 10 to?
So wait till they come in.
We have time for more?
Yeah, wait.
Okay, I think the next question is over here, sorry, because I skipped it earlier.
Don't censor me.
I'm not censoring, Frank, I'm just saying I skipped it. So
Long couch.
you're next.
No offense taken either. Workers' Party, also a trade unionist as well. Thank you very much. Very stimulating to get started. And I was sitting here and just thinking an awful lot of what you've been saying. I'm also thinking about the cooperative movement. I've just been aware, I mentioned to my friend comrade here that the idea of cooperatives, I don't know if they started in Ireland, but they certainly it was something that was experimented with prior to the 1916 Contemporary Revolution, and the world has changed a great deal, and I wouldn't be against cooperatives. I wouldn't be against workers improving their situation within this current system, as it is. I've also heard colleagues said the danger of assimilation. I believe that capitalism, which is beyond recognition from what we understood, and from Fidel Castro and talking about capitalism is beyond recognition. It's no longer indigenous or homogenous. Globalization, globalized capital, globalized solution. And I was thinking of workers, particularly I have family in Indonesia, and we all know what happened there and who was behind that. And apparently they got a 46% pay rise in the last year from working for 50 cents a day. 50 cents a day, so they're now earning probably $1 a day. And working maybe 12 hours in factories for the rest of the day to produce our shoes for us. They can't afford the shoe. This is symbiosis that doesn't come close. Unfortunately, they don't stand a chance. I think that your view, and it is interesting, and it probably will work in more developed countries like America, because it has a sort of syndicalist tinge to it. I feel for some countries, and the weakness of globalization is that it is not homogenous or indigenous, it is global. And it will fracture, and it is fracturing. And I think the opportunities for what you would call rupture, they do exist. And I think for some people living at that level of poverty that we have no awareness of, there probably the only solution. We're living on extremely repressive regimes that would never tolerate that kind of democratic approach that you advocate. But I think it has its place. And it has its place maybe in more advanced economies, and I'm sure it will achieve a measure of success in America, and I would wish it well. But for me, the Marxist-Leninist approach, I think, has not been built up. It's not dead. It It's not a fantasy. The idea of at some point arriving at a democratic, egalitarian society is a stage. There may have to be revolution that doesn't necessarily create that immediately. It sets the basis for it. But these things maybe can help, but they certainly wouldn't be my goal. But listen, thank you very much.
So let me make two comments. One is a lot of these ideas come from Brazil, not so middle level countries, not the poorest countries. A lot of the innovations that are occurring and the growth of interstitial strategies are occurring not in the developed countries. So I don't think this is exclusively a northern perspective, although of course my understanding of the obstacles and the possibilities is anchored in my own context. Secondly, to be more precise about my argument about rupture, I think ruptures at the level of states are certainly possible. We have plenty of examples of that, of state structures that are in which power is seized, an old order is destroyed, and a new structure is put in place in a fairly rapid and concentrated way. We know that political ruptures are possible. The question is what kind of social ruptures come in the aftermath and under what historical conditions. Now there are certainly historical conditions in which it's better to have an undemocratic but relatively egalitarian set of policies from a regime that's acting in the broad interest of the masses but in a repressive and often brutal way. That still might be better than the alternatives available. I don't think that's a desirable model, however, for socialism. And I think it's a mistake to call those aftermaths socialism. They do not create a socially empowered economy in which ordinary people who are doing the work of the economy control their own destinies. That's not the kind of economy that has been produced by those ruptures. It still might be better to have authoritarian statism in some places than capitalism. But I don't think it should be viewed as a stage towards socialism, because there's no evidence that that's what it develops into. Certainly the Chinese and Russian cases, when they reached their contradictory impasses, did not then take a leap towards socialism. They took a leap back to much more vibrantly capitalist forms. Vibrant in the Chinese case, unvibrant in the Russian case. So, and for the West, I don't think it's a desirable scenario to imagine that we would go through a period of authoritarian, dictatorial, statist destruction of capitalism, which would then culminate in democratic socialism. I think that's not a plausible scenario. I don't see any mechanisms by which that trajectory could possibly have an internal endogenous dynamic to lead in that direction. And therefore we have to figure out how to do this democratically with confrontation and struggle. So that's the ruptural moment. The aspects of ruptural strategies that come into play are, this is a question of mobilization and struggle, not goodwill. But still, I think that something of the order that I've described is the more plausible way of thinking about it.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question.
I'm Frank Hayes. I'm a member of the Workers' Party, also from County Wicklow. And I want to thank you, Eric, for coming here as well. You've worked a miracle. You've got people from so many different organisations who talk to each other and who should, more than anything, be talking to each other in our current crisis. I'm an old-fashioned Marxist. I'm an old Bolshevik. I'm a Marxist and a Bolshevik from the days before Stalin. So that means I view Marxism as a science. Marxism just doesn't encompass the world of politics, social transformation, or economic processes. It is in fact something which looks at the very nature of the relationship between thinking and between being, between that and being. And as such, it postulates that material world, external, is primary, and our reflection of it in our heads, our ideas, is secondary. That must be the starting point for anybody who calls themselves a Marxist. You cannot be a Marxist and be an idealist at the same time. It's not possible. So, as a Marxist, when we are not in a sitting room or drawing room discussing politely. We are here in a theatre of very robust ideas. And I'm afraid we mustn't blanch from gutting the ideas that we identify as being incorrect or obstructional in terms of what we seek to achieve in improving the lot of humanity, these days in a global sense. Marx identified the relationship between thinking and being as being a matter which could be described as materialist dialectics, not dialectical materialism, what the Stalinists later coined as a phrase, dynamat ultimately in the 60s. But materialist dialectics transposes the relationship of the adjective and the noun, and it's very important because it means it's a thoroughly materialist world outlook. And therefore, no matter what your ideas are about this, and no matter what my ideas are about the process of the collapse of capitalism, capitalism will collapse in its own internally driven way. And our primary responsibility is to try and identify what is correctly going on and reflect that in human thought, and out of that thought, to build a program of action to guide revolutionary practice. That, to me, is Marxism. And nothing else is Marxism. Everything else is reformism. So, well, I thank you for coming here, and I hope that the discussions that have begun today, and I thank you for beginning those, we must ask our comrades in the other parties that are socialist, and even the academics who like to sit on the fence and talk about us, we must ask them all. We must ask them all to continue this debate on a very regular basis, and I hope that that will be the fruit of what we do today. Just, if I may, political power structures are real. Economic collapse is real. And social change that comes as a consequence of that will be real. It's our job to seriously discuss, in my view, the scientific way in which this can be achieved consciously. The difference between the transition from feudalism to capitalism and the now existent transformation from capitalism to socialism is that the first was unconscious. This can be conscious. And Marxism as a science is what gives us the consciousness. And I'd ask people to continue this discussion.
So let me just make one comment. I mean, I don't disagree with the broad contours of what you said. I consider if there's anything valuable in Marxism, it is by virtue of it being scientific, as opposed to it just being the views of particular people. It is a way of understanding scientifically the real mechanisms that operate in the world. And I'm a materialist as opposed to an idealist in the kind of technical sense that philosophers and Marxists talk about it. But I don't think the implication of that is that ideas can't be a material force. Otherwise, there'd be no point in us even talking about these things. That is, we're trying to convince each other of how best to understand these processes. And the force of argument matters in having people decide, yes, this strategy makes sense and this doesn't. There's an indeterminacy there. The material conditions create sets of limits of possibility. But it is not the case that ideas are just mechanical reflections of the world. They're creatively processed reflections of the world. We act as agents consciously, the word you use, to interpret and to process our understandings and to then crystallize them into perspectives. And that's why ideas are a material force in the world. Not disembodied ideas, so it's not the world spirit or something, but embodied ideas, ideas embodied in political programs and party strategies in collective fora like this. And in those terms, I don't think that, I think Marxism is basically, as a body of thought, has not provided us with a scientifically well-grounded account of how to transform advanced capitalist societies into a socialist alternative.
Except that that's your idea.
Yeah, but I don't, Marxism makes claims about it, but I don't think it provides the evidentiary basis for a fully scientifically robust account of this. That is, our state of knowledge is not that of physics, it's not that of evolutionary biology. Our knowledge of this complex system are way weaker than that. And therefore we should not act as if we have certainty in our understanding of what the possibilities are. Certainty is in any case an unscientific perspective. Certainty is what ideologies give us, not what science gives us. What science gives us is perpetual skepticism about our own state of knowledge. And I certainly acknowledge that I could be completely wrong about my thesis about rupture, but I have arguments and evidence from research and from other sources as to why I think this is the best bet. But that's, I think, the right way to think about it. What it means to claim it's science. It's provisional, always, if it's science, not certain.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap up there. So, for a start, I'd like to thank Erik for coming along. You can sit down for a second. I don't know if he was expecting quite such a robust discussion.
It's great.
Just to mention, he is speaking in Limerick and Cork over the next few days at slightly more academic forum for it, so he'll be able to relax at those. And then there's a day in Maynooth next Saturday, I think, which people can look up on the internet if they're looking for details. But it's about, what's the title of it?
Isn't this the poster for
It's called Alternatives for Transformation, a collaborative workshop. So if people are interested in that, they can look it up and chase that. So thanks to Erik, thanks to Dara for organising this. Great idea to grab Erik while he was over here. Oh yeah, doesn't it? Right, thanks for the party members and representatives and individuals for coming along. Much appreciated the discussion that went along here. The latest LookLeft is on sale here, €2, buy it now, straight off the presses. There's a collection to cover the cost of the room in the box here on the way out. If you could just throw a couple of quid on it, that would be great. One last thing, further announcement.
Everybody here is invited to the next forum. This is the first forum that the LookLeft magazine has organised, but we do have a trade union forum, and our next event is to mark International Women's Day. It's on Wednesday in Liberty Hall at 6 o'clock, and we have two speakers. One who's an organiser for SIP2 who works with low-paid workers, and the other one is Francis Devine from the Labour History Society. And he's going to speak in the context of women, the women who were forgotten in the 1940 lockout, and the experience that women have had in the workplace instead. So everybody here is more than welcome, and I think we'll be talking to Darren again about trying to have another non-trade union forum again in the future. So
That's it. This one.
Thanks again to everybody
yeah.
for contributing
This one's-
today. Well done.